Imagine watching your own child being thrown away like trash, left to freeze in the snow because someone decided they weren't good enough. That's exactly what happened to 7-year-old Elara when the cruel nobles cast her from their manor gates to die in the bitter winter cold. Duke Emeric found her there, barely breathing on the frozen ground. This powerful warrior had won countless battles, but had never known the joy of holding his own child. When he looked into Elara's eyes, something changed in his heart forever. He took her home and declared her under his protection. But the other nobles were furious. What happens when one man's act of mercy threatens to destroy everything the nobility stands for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter wind howled through the stone corridors of Caerwyn Castle like a restless spirit, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of harder days ahead. Duke Emeric stood at the great window of his solar, watching the grey dawn break over his lands. In his arms, wrapped in the finest wool his household could provide, lay the small girl he had found 3 days prior. Elara's torn cloak, that blood-stained piece of fabric that had barely covered her when he discovered her, now hung by the hearth, a silent testament to the cruelty she had endured. The child had not spoken since he brought her home, but her dark eyes followed his every movement with an intelligence that seemed far beyond her 7 years. "My lord," came a gentle voice from the doorway. Marcus, his steward for the past 15 years, entered with the measured steps of a man who had learned to read his master's moods. The greying man carried a tray of warm broth and fresh bread. Helena thought the child might take some nourishment this morning. Emeric turned from the window, his weathered face softening as he looked down at Elara. At 43, the Duke bore the scars of countless campaigns, a thin line along his jaw from a Flemish blade, calloused hands that had gripped sword hilts for decades, and eyes that had seen too much of war's brutality. Yet holding this fragile child, he felt something he had not experienced in years, purpose beyond duty. "She ate a bit yesterday evening," he murmured, settling into the carved oak chair beside the fire. "Did she not, little one?" Elara's gaze shifted to his face, and for a moment something flickered there, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of it. Her small hand emerged from the blankets and touched the bronze medallion that hung from his neck, a tarnished war medal that represented glories that now seemed hollow without someone to share them with. Marcus set the tray on the table nearby, his movements careful and quiet. "The household is concerned, my lord. Not about the child, mind you, but about what others might think. Word travels quickly in these parts. Let them think what they will," Emeric replied, though he understood Marcus's worry. For 30 years, this medal had been his most prized possession, awarded after the Battle of Greystone, where his tactical brilliance had saved 300 men. Now, watching this small girl trace its worn surface with wonder, he realized how empty such honors felt without a family to pass them down to. Helena appeared in the doorway, her round face flushed from the kitchen fires. At 52, she had been more mother to Emeric than servant, having raised him after his own mother's death. Her flour-dusted hands twisted in her apron as she studied the child. "Poor lamb," she whispered. "Those marks on her arms, what manner of beast would harm a child so?" The Duke's jaw tightened. When he had found Elara, her small body had borne the evidence of systematic cruelty, welts from a riding crop, bruises that spoke of rough handling, and worst of all, the look in her eyes that said she expected no kindness from the world. "The kind that values bloodlines over humanity," he said quietly. "The kind that forgets children are gifts, not possessions." Thomas, his captain of guard, filled the doorway with his broad frame. The man had fought beside Emeric in 7 campaigns, and his loyalty was absolute. "My lord, there are riders approaching, flying blackthorn colors." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air settled over the solar. Emeric had known this moment would come, but he had hoped for more time. More time to see Elara smile, more time to hear her voice, more time to prove to her that not all adults brought pain. How many? he asked, his voice taking on the edge that had once commanded armies. 12 men-at-arms, my lord. And Lord Blackthorn himself. Elara's grip on the medal tightened, and Emeric felt her small body tense against him. Somehow she understood. Children who had suffered always understood when danger approached. "Shall I prepare the hall for his lordship?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he would rather prepare a dungeon cell. "Aye, full ceremony. I want him to remember that he stands in my castle, on my lands, asking for my consideration." Emeric's free hand moved to stroke Elara's dark hair. "And Marcus, send word to Lady Catherine. Tell her I may have need of her counsel." As his household scattered to their duties, Emeric found himself alone with the child who had somehow changed everything. 3 days ago, his life had followed the same pattern it had for years, rising before dawn to review his land's accounts, training with his men, dining alone in the great hall while servants whispered about his lack of an heir. He had been content, or so he had told himself. A useful life in service to his people, even if it was empty of the laughter that echoed through other men's halls. "You know," he said softly to Elara, "I always imagined what it would be like to have a daughter. A little girl to teach about flowers and horses, to read stories to by the fire, to protect from all the world's cruelties." He paused, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "I never thought I would find her abandoned in the snow, like a miracle wrapped in rags." Elara's eyes never left his face. In their depths, he saw a flicker of something that made his breath catch, the beginning of hope. The castle around them bustled with preparation. Helena's voice carried from the kitchens as she directed the preparation of food, suitable for hosting a lord, even an unwelcome one. Thomas could be heard in the courtyard, his commands sharp as he arranged his men in formation. Marcus moved through the halls like a general preparing for siege, ensuring every detail would reflect the Duke's power and status. But in the Solar, time moved differently. Emeric found himself studying every detail of the child in his arms, the way her small fingers had relaxed their grip on his medal, the trust that was slowly replacing fear in her expression. The way she fit perfectly against his shoulder, as if she had always belonged there. "My lord," Helena had returned, carrying a bowl of warm water and soft cloths. "Perhaps we should tend to her properly before whatever comes next." Emeric nodded, understanding what she truly meant. If Blackthorn was coming to claim Elara, they should at least ensure she looked cared for, loved. Not that it would change his mind. Nothing would convince him to return this child to whatever hell she had escaped. But dignity mattered. As Helena gently washed Elara's face and hands, the Duke found himself making silent promises. He promised that no one would ever hurt her again. He promised that she would know what it meant to be cherished. He promised that whatever legal battles lay ahead, whatever political consequences he faced, he would not abandon her. The bronze medal caught the firelight as Elara released it, her small hand now resting trustingly on his chest. For 30 years, that medal had represented the pinnacle of his achievements. Now he realized it had been preparing him for this moment, to be not just a warrior, but a guardian, not just a duke, but a father. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, and somewhere in the distance the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. But in the warm circle of firelight, a battle-hardened duke and a wounded child continued the slow, precious work of becoming a family. The dawn light filtered through the stained glass windows of the abandoned chapel, casting rainbow patterns across the dusty stone floor. Brother Benedict knelt before the altar, his weathered hands clasped in prayer. But his mind was troubled by memories that had haunted him for months. When Marcus had arrived at the monastery before dawn with Duke Emeric's urgent message, Benedict had known this day would come. He had seen the signs, felt the weight of knowledge that he had carried alone since the deaths of Lord and Lady Ravencrest. Now, with the Duke's carriage waiting outside and the sound of approaching footsteps echoing through the chapel, he would finally speak the truth he had been too frightened to voice. "Brother Benedict?" Emeric's voice carried the respect due to a man of God, but also the urgency of a father protecting his child. The monk rose slowly, his joints protesting after 40 years of kneeling on stone floors. He was a small man, barely reaching Emeric's shoulder, but his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had served as confessor to 3 generations of nobles. "Duke Emeric, I have been expecting you." "The child, how does she fare?" "She remembers more than Blackthorn believes," Emeric replied carefully. "She speaks of wine brought to her parents' table, of sickness that came after health. I need to know what you witnessed at Ravencrest Manor." Benedict's weathered face creased with sorrow. "Come, there is something you must see." He led Emeric deeper into the chapel, past abandoned pews and faded tapestries, to a small alcove hidden behind the altar. There, covered by a cloth that had once been white but was now yellowed with age, hung a family portrait. When Benedict pulled away the covering, Emeric's breath caught. The painting showed a man with kind eyes and gentle bearing, clearly Lord Garrett Ravencrest, standing beside a woman of extraordinary beauty. Between them, her small hand in each of theirs, stood a little girl with dark hair and serious eyes that Emeric recognized immediately. "Elara," he whispered. "Painted just months before their deaths," Benedict confirmed. "Lord Garrett commissioned it as a gift for his lady wife's birthday. He wanted to capture their happiness." The monk's voice broke slightly. "They were so very happy." Emeric studied the painting with the eye of a man trained to notice details. Elara's parents looked healthy, prosperous, content. There was no shadow of illness, no hint of the tragedy that would soon befall them. "Tell me what happened," Emeric said quietly. Benedict sank onto a nearby stone bench, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "It began in autumn. Reports reached us of fever in the eastern villages. Nothing unusual for the season, but concerning nonetheless. Lord Blackthorn arrived at Ravencrest Manor, claiming he wished to help his brother prepare for the possibility of contagion." His brother. Lord Garrett was Blackthorn's younger brother by 2 years. Their father had divided the family lands between them, but Garrett received the larger portion, including the fertile river valley that produces the finest grain in 3 counties. Benedict's eyes hardened. Blackthorn never forgave that decision. Emeric felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So when Blackthorn visited, he stayed for a week, claiming he wanted to help Garrett draft new wills. "Sensible precautions," he said, given the fever spreading through the region. He brought gifts, wine from his own cellars, preserves from his cook, medicines from his own physician, and after he left, within days, both Lord Garrett and Lady Isabel fell ill. But it was not like any fever I had seen before. Benedict's hands trembled as he recalled the memory. It began slowly. Headaches, fatigue, loss of appetite. Then came the terrible stomach pains, the weakness that left them bedridden. What of their physician? Called away to tend another emergency the very day they fell sick. By the time a replacement could be summoned, it was too late. They died within hours of each other, as if their very souls were bound together in life and death. Emeric's jaw clenched. And Elara, untouched by whatever claimed her parents. She tried to care for them, bringing them water, reading to them, never leaving their sides. When they died, she was found curled between them on their bed, holding their hands. Benedict wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Blackthorn arrived the next morning, claiming he had sensed his brother's passing through divine providence. Convenient timing. Indeed, he immediately declared the child cursed, claimed her survival, proved she was in league with dark forces. The servants, terrified and grief-stricken, began to believe his words. When 3 of them fell ill with what was likely nothing more than common winter fever, Blackthorn used it as further proof of Elara's evil influence. Emeric studied the portrait again, noting the love evident in every brushstroke. "This painting, why is it here instead of at the manor? I smuggled it out the night before Blackthorn had the child cast from the house. I could not bear to see it destroyed, along with every other trace of that family's happiness." Benedict stood and moved to a wooden chest beside the altar. "There is more." From the chest, he withdrew a small leather journal bound with string. Lord Garrett's personal diary. He gave it to me for safekeeping the day before he died, when he was still lucid enough to suspect that his illness was not natural. Emeric accepted the journal with hands that trembled slightly. Inside, written in a careful, educated script, were the final thoughts of a dying man. Benedict, if you are reading this, then my fears have proven justified. The wine Blackthorn brought tasted strange, bitter beneath the sweetness. Isabel noticed it too, but we thought it merely a poor vintage. Now we both suffer, and I begin to suspect treachery. If we do not survive, protect our Elara. She is innocent of whatever evil my brother may claim. The lands, the title, none of it matters. Only her safety matters now. Gia. He knew, Emeric said, his voice thick with emotion. He suspected, but he was too weak to act. By the time the poison, for poison I am certain it was, had done its work, he could barely hold a pen. Benedict placed a gentle hand on Emeric's arm. But he trusted me to remember, to speak for him when the time came. Will you testify to this? Before nobles, before church officials, before whoever Blackthorn brings to support his claim. Benedict's chin lifted with quiet determination. I will speak the truth, whatever the cost. Those two people were among the finest souls I have ever known, and their daughter deserves justice. Emeric carefully tucked the journal inside his cloak. Brother Benedict, you may have just saved that child's life. Then I have finally done something worthy with these old bones, the monk replied. But be warned, Duke Emeric. Blackthorn is not a man to be cornered without fighting back. If he killed once to claim those lands, he will not hesitate to kill again. As they prepared to leave the chapel, Emeric took one last look at the family portrait. In it, he saw not just the tragedy of lives cut short, but the foundation of the case he would need to build. Here was proof of happiness destroyed, innocence betrayed, and a child who deserved far better than the world had given her. The truth was beginning to emerge from the shadows, piece by precious piece. The kitchen gardens of Caerwyn Castle hummed with quiet activity as Helena knelt among the herb beds, her experienced hands selecting leaves and roots with the precision of a master healer. Beside her, Elara watched with fascination as the older woman explained each plant's properties. This one, Helena said, holding up a sprig of feverfew, eases pain in the head when the thoughts grow too heavy. And this, she touched a delicate plant with silver-green leaves, is wormwood. Dangerous in large amounts, but a tiny bit can settle an uneasy stomach. Elara reached out tentatively, her small fingers brushing the wormwood's fuzzy leaves. My mama knew about plants, too. She had a garden behind our house with rows and rows of different herbs. Helena's heart clenched at the wistful tone in the child's voice. Did she teach you about them? Some. She said her grandmother taught her, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. She said women in our family always knew how to help people feel better. Elara's eyes brightened with memory. She used to say the plants would tell us their secrets if we listened carefully enough. A wise woman, your mother, Helena murmured, but inwardly she felt a chill. In their collection of healing herbs lay the very reason some whispered about Elara's supposed powers. To those who didn't understand, a child's knowledge of healing plants could seem unnatural, even threatening. Helena, Elara's voice was small, uncertain. The man who came yesterday, Lord Blackthorn, he said I hurt people, but I only ever tried to help them. Did I do something wrong? Helena set down her basket and gathered the child into her arms, flour-dusted apron and all. Oh, sweet lamb, you did nothing wrong. Nothing at all. Some people fear what they don't understand, and they make up stories to explain away their fear. But people did get sick after Mom and Papa died. The servants, just like he said, grief makes people sick sometimes, Helena said gently. When the heart breaks, the body often follows. That's not magic or curses, that's simply how people are made. From across the garden came the sound of approaching footsteps. Lady Catherine emerged from the morning mist like a vision, her emerald cloak damp with dew and her auburn hair escaping from its careful arrangement. At 38, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had managed her own estates since her husband's death 5 years prior. "Helena, Elara," she called warmly. Emeric told me I might find you here. Elara pressed closer to Helena, still wary of strangers, despite the woman's gentle manner. Lady Catherine approached slowly, as one might approach a skittish colt. "You must be Elara," Catherine said, settling gracefully onto the garden bench nearby. "I'm Catherine. I've been friends with your Duke Emeric since we were children, much younger than you are now." "He's not really my Duke," Elara said quietly. "He just found me." "Oh, but he is yours now," Catherine replied with absolute certainty. "I have known Emeric for 30 years, and I've never seen him so determined to protect anything as he is to protect you. Do you know what he told me yesterday?" Elara shook her head, curious despite her shyness. "He said that finding you was like finding a piece of his heart he didn't know was missing." Catherine's smile was warm and genuine. "And knowing Emeric as I do, I can tell you, he doesn't say such things lightly." Helena continued her work among the herbs, but her ears were attuned to every word. She had been hoping Lady Catherine would visit, not just for the political support her noble birth provided, but for the maternal warmth Elara so desperately needed. "Helena has been teaching me about plants," Elara offered, beginning to relax slightly. "Has she? How wonderful. I dabble in herb lore myself. It's essential knowledge for anyone who manages a household." Catherine moved closer, examining Helena's collection. "Ah, you have comfrey here. Excellent for healing wounds. And is that valerian? Perfect for helping troubled souls find restful sleep." Elara's eyes widened. "You know about plants, too?" "My grandmother taught me just as your mother taught you. It's a tradition passed down through generations of women who understood that sometimes the best medicine comes from the earth itself." Catherine picked up a sprig of lavender, crushing it gently between her fingers to release its calming scent. "There's nothing magical about it, despite what some ignorant people might claim. It's simply knowledge, carefully preserved and lovingly shared." The conversation was interrupted by Thomas's approach from the castle. His expression was grim as he addressed Lady Catherine. "My lady, Duke Emeric requests your presence in the Solar. We've received word from the village." Catherine's face grew serious. "What sort of word?" "Lord Blackthorn has been spreading his version of events among the common folk. Claims the Duke harbours a demon child who will bring plague and death to the region." Thomas's jaw clenched. "Some are beginning to believe him." Helena instinctively moved closer to Elara, who had gone very still at Thomas's words. The child's face had lost what little colour she had gained during her recovery. How many believe such nonsense? Catherine asked sharply. "Too many, my lady?" Fear spreads faster than truth, especially when it comes from a lord's mouth. Thomas looked apologetically at Elara. "Forgive me, little one. I speak too plainly." "No," Elara said, her voice steady, despite the hurt in her eyes. "I need to know what people are saying about me. I need to know how much trouble I'm bringing to everyone here." Catherine knelt beside the child, taking her small hands in her own. "You listen to me, Elara. You are not bringing trouble to anyone. There are people in this world who use fear as a weapon, who spread lies because truth doesn't serve their purposes. But there are also people who stand up to such bullies, who choose love over fear, like Duke Emeric, and like me, and like Helena here and Thomas and Brother Benedict." Catherine's voice grew fierce. "You are not alone in this fight, child. You have more allies than you know." As they made their way back to the castle, Helena's collection of herbs in her basket, she couldn't help but notice how Elara's small hand had found its way into Lady Catherine's. Perhaps, she thought, this child who had known too much loss was finally beginning to understand what it meant to have a family. Choose you, defend you and love you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The herbs in her basket represented more than just healing plants now. They were symbols of the knowledge passed down through generations of women, the wisdom that connected Elara to her mother's memory and her new family's future. And if some people feared that knowledge, well, perhaps it was time they learned that fear was no match for love, backed by determination. The monastery archives smelled of parchment, ink, and centuries of accumulated wisdom. Brother Benedict moved through the narrow aisles between towering shelves with the careful steps of a man who knew every scroll and document in the collection. Behind him, Duke Emeric followed with Marcus at his side, both men understanding that whatever they discovered here could determine Elara's fate. "Here," Benedict said, stopping before a chest bound with iron and sealed with the abbey's mark. "Land records dating back 200 years. If the truth exists anywhere, it will be in these documents." Marcus produced a key he had been given by the abbot, and together they opened the ancient chest. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect them from moisture and time, lay dozens of parchments covered in careful scribal hands. "What exactly are we looking for?" Emeric asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Proof of what I have long suspected," Benedict replied, withdrawing a particularly old document with trembling hands. "The original land grant that established the Ravencrest holdings." As he unrolled the parchment, the three men leaned closer to examine the faded but still legible text. The document bore the seal of King Edward II and detailed the division of lands between the Blackthorn brothers following their father's death 30 years prior. "Sweet Mary," Marcus breathed, his finger tracing a particular passage. "Look here, my lord." Emeric read the ancient charter carefully, his expression growing darker with each line. According to the document, Lord Garrett Ravencrest had been granted not just the lands he had held at his death, but an additional tract along the river, land that was currently claimed and occupied by Lord Blackthorn. "This changes everything," Emeric said quietly. "If this charter is legitimate," "It is," Benedict assured him. "I helped transcribe this very document when I was a young novice. The original grant was clear. Garrett received the river valley and all its tributaries, while Blackthorn received the hill country to the north." Marcus studied the document more closely. "But how did Blackthorn come to hold the riverlands? Surely such a change would require royal approval." Benedict's face was grim. "It would indeed, unless—" He paused, moving to another section of the archives. "Unless there was another document, one that superseded the original grant." After several minutes of searching, he withdrew a much newer parchment, this one bearing a seal from only 3 years prior. "Here, a revised land grant issued after reports reached the Crown that Lord Garrett had died without heir." Without heir. Emeric's voice rose dangerously. "Elara was very much alive 3 years ago. According to this document, filed by Lord Blackthorn himself, the child Elara died in the same plague that claimed her parents. As the closest male relative, Blackthorn petitioned for and received control of the Ravencrest holdings." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of monks chanting their morning prayers. Emeric felt a cold fury building in his chest. Not the hot rage of battle, but the calculating anger of a man who had uncovered systematic betrayal. "So Blackthorn didn't just murder his brother and sister-in-law," Marcus said slowly. "He declared their daughter dead to the crown, while simultaneously planning to have her killed in truth." "It appears so," Benedict confirmed. "And it means that Elara is not just the rightful heir to her parents' personal estate. She is the legal owner of lands that Blackthorn has been claiming and profiting from for 3 years. Emeric carefully rolled up both documents. "Brother Benedict, I need you to prepare certified copies of these charters. Marcus, send word to Lady Catherine immediately. She has connections at court that we may need." "What of the child, my lord?" Marcus asked. "Should we tell her what we've discovered?" Emeric considered this carefully. "Not yet. She has carried enough burdens for one so young, but she deserves to know that her parents were not just good people. They were also wealthy landowners whose deaths made someone else very rich indeed." As they prepared to leave the archives, Brother Benedict touched Emeric's arm. "Duke, there is something else you should know. This morning I received word from the village. Lord Blackthorn has announced that he will hold a public gathering tomorrow, demanding that the people petition you to surrender the demon child for the good of the community." "Public pressure," Marcus muttered. "He seeks to turn the people against us before any legal proceedings begin." "Then we must respond in kind," Emeric said, his tactical mind already working. "Brother Benedict, would the Abbey be willing to host a gathering of our own? A chance for the people to hear the truth about Elara and her family?" Benedict's eyes lit up with understanding. "The Church has a duty to protect the innocent. Yes, I believe the abbot would approve such a gathering." As they emerged from the monastery into the late morning sun, Emeric felt the weight of the ancient charter in his cloak. It represented more than just legal documents. It was proof that Elara had been systematically robbed of her birthright, that her suffering had been orchestrated not by supernatural forces, but by a man consumed with greed. The ride back to Caerwyn was quiet, each man lost in his own thoughts about the implications of their discovery. When they arrived at the castle, they found Elara in the courtyard with Thomas, watching as he instructed some of the younger guards in sword work. "Duke Emeric," she called out, running to meet him with a smile that made his heart clench. In just a few days, this child had gone from a broken, silent waif to a little girl who lit up at his return. The thought that someone had tried to erase her very existence from history filled him with a protective rage, unlike anything he had ever felt. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, her dark eyes serious. "We found the truth," he replied, kneeling to bring himself to her level. "And the truth, little one, is that you are far more important than anyone realized. You are not just Elara, you are Lady Elara Ravencrest, rightful heir to lands and titles that belong to you by birth." Her eyes widened. "But Lord Blackthorn said many things that were not true. Your parents were wealthy landowners, and those lands should have passed to you when they died. Instead, he convinced the crown that you had died as well, allowing him to claim what was rightfully yours." Elara was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she looked up at him with an expression far too mature for her years. "So he didn't just want me gone because he thought I was cursed. He wanted me gone because I stood in the way of his stealing my family's property." "Exactly. And now that we know the truth, we can fight him properly, not just to keep you safe, but to restore what was taken from you, for the first time since he had found her in the snow." Elara's smile carried something beyond gratitude or tentative happiness. It carried the fierce determination of a child who had finally learned she had something worth fighting for. The leather-bound journal lay open on Emeric's desk, its pages filled with the careful script of a man unaccustomed to recording his deepest thoughts. By candlelight in the quiet hours before dawn, the Duke had taken to writing, not military reports or estate accounts, but the fears and hopes that crowded his mind since Elara had entered his life. Third day of her residence here, one entry read, "She smiled today when Helena showed her the castle cats." Such a small thing, yet it felt like witnessing the sun break through storm clouds. How does one learn to be a father at 43? What if my efforts to protect her only bring her greater harm? The sound of soft footsteps in the corridor made him close the journal quickly, but it was only Elara herself, wrapped in a woolen shawl and carrying a cup of warm milk. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. "Helena said sometimes warm milk helps." Emeric gestured to the chair beside his desk. "Come sit with me. The castle can feel very large and empty in the dark hours." As she settled into the chair, her small legs dangling, Elara's eyes fell on the journal. "Is that where you write about important Duke things?" "In a way," Emeric replied carefully. "I write about trying to understand how to be the person you deserve to have protecting you. You don't know how to be a papa?" The question was innocent, curious rather than judgmental. Emeric felt his throat tighten. "I'm afraid I have no experience with such things. I've led armies, managed estates, negotiated treaties, but I've never tucked a little girl into bed, or worried about whether she had enough to eat, or wondered if her dreams were pleasant ones." Elara sipped her milk thoughtfully. "I don't know how to be a daughter either. Not anymore. I knew how to be Mama and Papa's daughter, but this is different." "How so?" "With them, I always knew what was expected. Papa taught me about the estate, about being fair to the tenants. Mama taught me about healing and being kind to everyone, even people who weren't kind back." She paused, her dark eyes serious. "But I don't know what kind of daughter a duke needs." The honesty in her voice nearly broke his heart. Without thinking, Emeric reached over and took her small hand in his. "Elara, listen to me carefully. I don't need you to be any particular kind of daughter. I just need you to be yourself, the brave, kind, intelligent girl I found in the snow, even if I bring trouble, even if people think I'm cursed. Especially then. Do you know what I wrote in here yesterday?" He opened the journal to a recent entry. "I wrote that having you here has made me remember what it feels like to have something worth fighting for, beyond duty or honor. You've reminded me what it means to love someone more than your own life." Elara set down her cup and moved closer to his chair. "May I read it?" Emeric hesitated, then realized that hiding his fears from her would only increase her own. He turned the journal so she could see the page, helping her with the more difficult words. "She asked today if she could call me Papa," the entry read. "The word hit me like a crossbow bolt to the chest, not from pain, but from a joy so sudden and fierce I could barely speak. I told her yes, of course yes, but inside I wondered, what if I fail her as I have failed so many others? What if my protection proves insufficient? What if loving her condemns her to greater suffering?" "You wrote that I asked to call you Papa?" Elara's voice was very small. "You haven't yet," Emeric said gently. "But I hoped. I mean, if you wanted to—" "Papa," she said simply, trying the word. Then again, more confidently, "Papa." The sound of it nearly undid him. For 30 years he had been Duke Emeric, Lord of Caerwyn, commander of armies. But in that moment, sitting in the candlelit chamber with this remarkable child, he became something he had never thought possible. A father. "There's more," he said, turning to another page. "Listen to this. She has nightmares still, but they are growing less frequent. Last night I heard her crying and went to comfort her. When I asked what troubled her dreams, she said she dreamed that everyone she loved kept disappearing. I promised her that I would never disappear, never leave her, never stop protecting her. I pray to God that it is a promise I can keep." Elara leaned against his chair, her small body warm and trusting. "I still have those dreams sometimes, but they're not as scary now. Why is that? Because in the dreams now, when people start to disappear, you're always there. You never fade away like the others do." The simple faith in her voice humbled him. Here was a child who had lost everything, who had every reason to distrust the promises of adults. Yet she believed in him completely. "Elara, Papa," she corrected herself with a small smile. "May I tell you something I've been thinking about? Always, I think maybe we're both learning how to be a family at the same time. You're learning how to be a papa, and I'm learning how to be a daughter again. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to know everything right away." Her wisdom astounded him. "You're absolutely right. We'll figure it out together. And if Lord Blackthorn tries to take me away—" Emeric's voice took on the steel that had once commanded respect on battlefields across 3 kingdoms. "Then he will discover that taking something from Duke Emeric of Caerwyn requires going through Duke Emeric of Caerwyn. And I have never been defeated in single combat. But what if he doesn't fight fair? What if he uses tricks or lies? Then we'll be smarter than he is. We'll use truth as our weapon and justice as our shield." He closed the journal and set it aside. "But right now, what matters most is that you know you are loved, you are wanted, and you are safe." Elara nodded, her eyelids growing heavy. "Papa, will you carry me back to my room? The castle doesn't feel so big and empty when you're with me." As he lifted her in his arms, feeling her settle trustingly against his shoulder, Emeric understood that his journal entries had been missing the most important truth of all. It wasn't about learning to be a father. It was about recognizing that he had been meant to be Elara's father all along. Everything in his life, every battle fought and victory won, had been preparing him for this moment, this child. This love that transformed duty into devotion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new fears to overcome. But tonight, carrying his daughter through the quiet corridors of Caerwyn Castle, Duke Emeric had never felt richer in all his life. Lord Blackthorn entered the great hall of Caerwyn Castle like a storm front moving across the moors. dark, imposing, and carrying the promise of destruction. His black cloak swept behind him as he strode across the stone floor, flanked by 6 armed men whose hands rested meaningfully on their sword hilts. Behind them, a 7th man carried an ornate parchment bearing the royal seal. Duke Emeric sat in his high chair at the head of the hall. Elara nestled quietly beside him in a smaller chair that Marcus had hastily arranged. The child wore a simple but clean dress that Helena had found in the castle's stores, her dark hair braided with a ribbon. To any observer, she looked like exactly what Emeric intended her to appear, his ward. Under his protection, belonging in this place, Lord Blackthorne, Emeric said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never backed down from a fight. "Welcome to Caerwyn. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Blackthorne stopped before the dais, his pale eyes fixing immediately on Elara. The child pressed closer to Emeric's chair, and the Duke's hand moved protectively to her shoulder. There was something predatory in Blackthorne's gaze that made every instinct Emeric possessed scream danger. "You know precisely why I am here, Emeric." Blackthorne's voice was silk over steel. "You have something that belongs to me." "I have many things," Emeric replied evenly. "You'll need to be more specific." The man with the parchment stepped forward, unrolling the document with theatrical precision. "By royal decree and divine right, Lord Blackthorne demands the immediate return of the child Elara, ward of the deceased Lord and Lady Ravencrest, to his custody as her rightful guardian and nearest living relative." The words hit the hall like hammer blows. Emeric felt Elara stiffen beside him, her small hand reaching for his. The revelation that she was of noble blood explained much. Her bearing, her intelligence, the careful way she observed everything around her. But it also made everything infinitely more complicated. "Ravencrest," Emeric said slowly. "I knew Lord Garrett Ravencrest. A good man. I was sorry to hear of his death." His eyes never left Blackthorne's face. "I was unaware he had a daughter, because she killed him," Blackthorne said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "She killed both her parents with her cursed presence. The fever took them both within days of each other, yet she remained untouched. The Church has declared her tainted by dark forces." Elara made a small, wounded sound, and Emeric's jaw clenched. "The child is 7 years old. She has no more command over fever than she does over the weather. Tell that to the dozen servants who died in that house after she came of age," Blackthorne snapped. "Tell that to the priest who tried to bless her and fell ill the very next day. The girl is cursed, and she will bring that curse upon your house if you harbor her." Thomas stepped forward from his position by the wall, his hand moving to his sword hilt. "My lord speaks carefully in this hall, Blackthorne. These are serious accusations you make against a child." Blackthorne's smile was cold as winter stone. "Accusations? I speak of witnessed facts. The child's very presence is poison. I come here offering to spare you and your household from her influence, yet you resist." "What I resist," Emeric said, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of a born warrior, "is handing over a child to a man who speaks of her as if she were a diseased animal. What I resist is accepting wild tales of curses and dark magic from a man whose own reputation is built on cruelty." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several of Blackthorne's men shifted nervously. The Duke's reputation as a warrior was well known, and they stood in his stronghold surrounded by his people. "Careful, Emeric," Blackthorne said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "You walk close to treason. The Church supports my claim. The Crown recognizes my right as her uncle and guardian. Would you set yourself against both throne and altar for a child who brings nothing but death?" "I would set myself against hell itself for this child," Emeric replied, his voice carrying the ring of absolute truth. "And I will not debate theology with a man who measures a child's worth by the misfortunes that befall others." Marcus appeared at Emeric's shoulder, carrying a leather document case. "My lord, perhaps Lord Blackthorne would benefit from reviewing the relevant laws regarding wardship and guardianship, particularly as they apply to children found abandoned and in distress." Blackthorne's eyes narrowed. The girl was not abandoned. She was removed from my household for the safety of all concerned. Temporarily removed. Emeric's voice dropped to a deadly quiet. Is that what you call casting a 7-year-old child into a winter storm to die? I call it necessary, Blackthorn replied, but his voice carried a defensive edge now. The church advised that distance might break whatever hold the dark forces had upon her. If she survived the trial, it would prove her innocence, and if she died, then the curse would die with her. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Blackthorn's own men looked uncomfortable with their lord's words. In the gallery above, several castle servants had gathered to listen, and their expressions ranged from shocked to disgusted. Elara stood suddenly, her small form trembling, but her voice clear as a bell when she finally spoke. I didn't hurt them. I loved my mama and papa. I tried to help them when they were sick, but I couldn't save them. It was the first time anyone except Emeric had heard her voice, and the simple dignity in her words was more powerful than any legal argument. Here was not a creature of darkness, but a child who had lost everything and blamed herself for tragedies beyond her control. Blackthorn's face flushed red. The demon speaks through her mouth. Can you not see the deception? What I see, Emeric said, moving to stand beside Elara's chair, is a brave little girl who has endured more than any child should. What I see is a man so consumed with superstition and hatred that he would murder his own brother's child to ease his fears. The accusation of murder struck like lightning. Blackthorn's hand moved to his sword, but Thomas was already there, blade half drawn, with a dozen castle guards behind him. 3 days, Blackthorn said, his voice shaking with rage. I give you 3 days to come to your senses, Emeric. 3 days to hand over the child willingly. After that, I return with the full authority of church and crown, and I will take her by force if necessary. You are welcome to try, Emeric replied. But know this, any man who seeks to harm this child will answer to me personally. And I have not lost a personal fight in 30 years. Blackthorn turned on his heel, his cloak billowing dramatically. 3 days, Emeric. Enjoy them. They may be the last peaceful days your household ever knows. As Blackthorn and his men strode from the hall, Elara reached up and took Emeric's hand. Her small fingers were cold but steady, and when he looked down at her, he saw not fear but determination. He's lying, she said quietly, about how my parents died. I remember. Emeric knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. What do you remember, little one? They weren't sick when he came to visit. They got sick after. After he brought them wine and stayed for supper, her dark eyes were serious beyond her years. He said he was helping them make their wills, because people were dying of fever in the next village. The implications hit Emeric like a physical blow. If Elara's memory was accurate, if Blackthorn had somehow poisoned her parents, then this was not about guardianship or church doctrine. This was about covering up murder and claiming the Ravencrest lands for himself. As the great doors closed behind Blackthorn's party, Emeric realized that saving Elara would require more than just protective instincts and sword skill. It would require proof, allies, and a battle plan worthy of the most crucial campaign of his life. 3 days. He had 3 days to uncover the truth and save the daughter fate had given him. The dying servant lay propped against pillows in the small chamber behind the monastery infirmary, his weathered face bearing the grey pallor of a man whose time on earth was measured in hours rather than days. His name was Willem, and for 30 years he had served the Ravencrest household faithfully until fear and superstition had driven him away after his lord and lady's deaths. Brother Benedict knelt beside the bed, his voice gentle as he administered last rites. Peace, Willem. Your sins are forgiven, your soul is clean before God, brother, Willem whispered, his voice barely audible. There is something I must tell before I meet my Maker, about Lord Garrett and Lady Isabel, about how they truly died. Duke Emeric leaned forward from his position near the window. He had been summoned to the monastery at dawn when Brother Benedict sent word that Willem was asking for him specifically, claiming to have witnessed something important during the final days at Ravencrest Manor. I'm listening, Emeric said, softly, Willem's trembling hand reached beneath his pillow and withdrew. A small object, a gold signet ring bearing the Ravencrest coat of arms. "Lord Garrett, he gave me this the night before he died. Told me to keep it safe, said it might be important someday." Brother Benedict carefully took the ring, examining its intricate engravings. "The witness ring," he breathed. "Willem, what did you see?" The dying man's eyes focused with effort. "I saw Lord Blackthorn in the wine cellar 3 nights before my lord fell ill. He was doing something to the bottles, adding something from a small vial. When he saw me watching, he said he was adding a tonic to help preserve the wine during transport." "But you didn't believe him," Emeric said. "The way he moved, the way he looked around to make sure no one else was watching. It was the behavior of a man doing wrong, not good." Willem coughed, flecks of blood staining the cloth Benedict held to his lips. "And when my lord and lady fell sick after drinking that wine, I knew. God help me, I knew, and I said nothing. Why didn't you speak before?" Emeric asked, though his tone held no judgment. Fear. Lord Blackthorn had power, influence. Who would believe a servant against a lord? And when he started claiming the little mistress was cursed, Willem's voice grew stronger with urgency. "I ran. I was a coward and I ran. But the guilt has eaten at me like poison itself." Brother Benedict gently closed Willem's fingers around the ring. "And you're speaking now when it matters most. That takes courage." "The ring," Willem continued. "Lord Garrett said something when he gave it to me. He said, if something happens to us, if someone claims Elara is dead or missing, show them this ring. It proves she lived. It proves she mattered." Emeric felt the weight of those words. Even in his final hours, Lord Garrett had been thinking of his daughter's future, trying to protect her from whatever machinations Blackthorn might attempt. "Willem," Emeric said urgently, "would you be willing to testify to what you saw? To swear before God and witnesses that Blackthorn poisoned the wine?" The servant's eyes cleared with sudden determination. "If it will save the little mistress from that monster, yes. I'll testify if God grants me strength enough to speak the words." Brother Benedict looked worried. "Willem is very weak. I'm not certain he'll survive until this evening's gathering. Then we bring the gathering to him," Emeric decided. "A formal testimony, witnessed and recorded here in the monastery. Something that cannot be dismissed or ignored." As if summoned by their conversation, Lady Catherine appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from hard riding. "Emeric, I came as soon as I received your message. The allies I've gathered are waiting in the monastery courtyard." "How many?" 15 lords and ladies who remember Lord Garrett fondly and distrust Blackthorn's sudden wealth. Among them, Sir Edmund of Westmarch. He served with you in the Flemish campaigns and carries considerable influence with the crown." Emeric nodded grimly. "Good, we'll need every ally we can muster. Sir Geoffrey has arrived with a formal writ demanding Elara's immediate surrender to Blackthorn's custody." "On what grounds?" "Accusations of witchcraft, substantiated by evidence of poisonous substances found among her belongings." Emeric's voice was heavy with disgust. "Evidence that I'm certain Blackthorn planted himself." Lady Catherine's eyes flashed with anger. "The audacity of the man. Does he truly believe he can manufacture evidence so blatantly?" "He believes fear will overcome reason," Brother Benedict said sadly. "And he may be right. I've received reports from the village. People are frightened, talking of curses and demons. Some are demanding that Elara be handed over before she brings plague to the entire region." Willem stirred on his bed, struggling to sit up straighter. "My Lady Catherine, I remember you. You visited Ravencrest Manor many times when the little mistress was small." "I did indeed, Willem. She was such a bright, loving child." Catherine moved closer to the bed. "She still is. Then you know she could never hurt anyone. The love in that family, it was real, pure. What Lord Blackthorn claims is impossible." As the morning progressed, the monastery filled with an unusual gathering. Sir Edmund arrived with 3 other knights, their loyalty to Emeric absolute. Several minor lords and ladies who had known the Ravencrest family came to pay their respects and offer support. Brother Augustine returned from his analysis of the poison vial, his findings more damning than anyone had hoped. The substance is definitely derived from foxglove, he reported to the assembled group. But it's been refined using techniques that require considerable knowledge and expensive equipment. This is not something a child could create, nor something that occurs naturally. Thomas had positioned his most trusted men throughout the village, disguised as traveling merchants and pilgrims. His report was sobering. Blackthorn has perhaps 50 armed men positioned around the village square. He's not just planning a legal proceeding, he's preparing for a battle, if necessary. Then we must be prepared as well, Emeric said. But our strength lies not in numbers, but in truth. If we can expose his lies publicly, dramatically, his support will crumble. Lady Catherine had been quiet during these preparations. But now she spoke with the voice of someone who had made a difficult decision. Emeric, there's something you should know. This morning I sent my fastest rider to the capital with a full report of everything we've discovered. If we fail today, if something happens to us, the king will know the truth. You risk much by involving yourself so deeply, Emeric said gratefully. Elara is not just your daughter now. She's become important to all of us. That child has awakened something in this community, something that Blackthorn's fear and hatred cannot destroy. As the afternoon wore on, final preparations were made. Willem's testimony was carefully recorded by Brother Benedict, witnessed by 3 nobles and sealed with the monastery's official mark. The witness ring was secured in a special case that Lady Catherine would carry. Brother Augustin prepared a detailed analysis of the poison that could be presented as evidence. But perhaps most importantly, Emeric spent time with Elara herself, preparing her for what was to come. "Papa," she said, as he helped her into her finest dress, a blue gown that Lady Catherine had brought from her own household. "I'm scared." "It's natural to be frightened," he replied, kneeling to adjust the ribbon in her hair. "But remember, you're not facing this alone. You have me, you have Lady Catherine, you have Brother Benedict, and you have friends you don't even know about yet. What if people believe the bad things Lord Blackthorn says about me?" Emeric took her small hands in his larger ones. "Then we'll prove them wrong, not with anger or violence, but with truth and love. Sometimes that's all it takes, showing people who you really are, instead of who others claim you to be. And if that's not enough," his voice took on the steel that had commanded armies, "then I will remind everyone present that you are under my protection, and that anyone who seeks to harm you will answer to me personally." As the sun began its descent toward evening, the unlikely army of truth-seekers prepared to face the gathering storm. They had evidence, they had allies, they had righteousness on their side. But they also faced a desperate man with 50 armed soldiers and the willingness to commit murder to protect his secrets. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Elara's fate, but the very nature of justice in a world where fear often triumphed over truth. And at the center of it all, a 7-year-old girl prepared to face her parents' killer with courage that would have made them proud. The village square had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom, with wooden benches arranged in careful rows before a raised platform where Lord Blackthorn sat beside Sir Geoffrey. The ceremonial goblet, an ornate silver chalice that gleamed in the torchlight, rested on the table between them. It filled with wine that would traditionally be shared to seal any judgment rendered. Duke Emeric entered the square, with Elara at his side, Lady Catherine flanking them both. The child wore her blue gown with quiet dignity, her small hand resting confidently in Emeric's as they approached the assembly. Behind them came Brother Benedict, carrying the sealed testimony and analysis that would either save or condemn them all. "Behold," Sir Geoffrey announced in a voice that carried across the square, "the child whose fate we gather to determine. Let all present witness this proceeding conducted under the authority of Crown and Church." Lord Blackthorn rose from his seat, his black robes making him appear like a carrion bird perched above the crowd. "Good people of this region, We are here because a dangerous creature has been allowed to poison the very air we breathe. Duke Emeric, in his misguided mercy, harbors the demon child who murdered her own parents. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Villagers who had known the Ravencrest family, merchants who traded in the region, farmers whose livelihoods depended on the land's prosperity. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity, fear, and uncertainty. Furthermore, Blackthorn continued, producing a small vial from his robes, my men have discovered this among the child's possessions, a poison of the most deadly variety, proof of her malicious intent toward all who show her kindness. Emeric felt Elara's hand tighten in his, but the child's voice was steady when she spoke. That's not mine. I've never seen it before. The demon lies as easily as breathing, Blackthorn replied smoothly. But we have evidence beyond denial. Sir Geoffrey reached for the ceremonial goblet, his movements theatrical and deliberate. By ancient tradition, we shall conclude this matter with the sharing of wine that represents the community's commitment to justice and truth. Brother Benedict stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of the church. Before any judgment is rendered, I demand the right to present testimony on behalf of the accused. What testimony could possibly excuse such obvious guilt? Blackthorn asked, but there was a slight edge of nervousness in his voice. The testimony of a dying man who witnessed the true poisoning, the murder of Lord Garrett and Lady Isabel Ravencrest. Benedict's words hit the assembly like a physical blow. Impossible, Sir Geoffrey said quickly. All witnesses to those deaths have been questioned thoroughly. All but one, Benedict replied, withdrawing Willem's sealed statement. Willem, who served the Ravencrest household for 30 years, who saw Lord Blackthorn add substances to wine in the cellar 3 nights before his lord and lady fell ill. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Several people stood to get a better view as Benedict read Willem's testimony aloud, his voice carrying clearly across the square. Blackthorn's face had gone pale, but he recovered quickly. The ravings of a dying man, influenced no doubt by the demon child's supernatural powers. Such testimony means nothing. Then perhaps this will mean something, Lady Catherine said, stepping forward and producing the witness ring. The signet ring of Lord Garrett Ravencrest, given to Willem as proof that his daughter lived and mattered. Sir Geoffrey examined the ring with growing discomfort. As the Crown's representative, he could not easily dismiss such a significant piece of evidence. And this, Brother Augustine added, presenting his analysis of the poison, proves that the substance Lord Blackthorn claims to have found among the child's belongings requires expertise and equipment far beyond the reach of any 7-year-old. The tide of opinion in the square was beginning to shift. Faces that had shown fear and suspicion were now turning toward confusion and doubt. The evidence was mounting too quickly, too thoroughly, for Blackthorn to dismiss. Enough! Blackthorn shouted, his composure finally cracking. These are all fabrications, lies created to protect a creature of darkness. I call upon Sir Geoffrey to render judgment immediately before this corruption spreads further. Sir Geoffrey reached again for the ceremonial goblet, but his hand shook slightly. The wine of judgment must be shared, he announced. The child will drink first, as is traditional when accusations of poison are involved. It was the moment Emeric had been waiting for. Indeed, he said calmly, let us follow tradition exactly. But first, let Lord Blackthorn demonstrate his faith in the wine's purity by serving it himself. Blackthorn's eyes flicked to the goblet, then to Emeric's face. For just an instant, something close to panic showed in his expression. That is not necessary. Sir Geoffrey can... But surely, Emeric continued, his voice carrying the authority of command, a man so concerned with proper procedure would want to ensure the wine is safe for a child to drink, unless, of course, he has reason to doubt its purity. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Around the square, people leaned forward, sensing that something crucial was about to unfold. The ceremonial goblet sat between them, gleaming in the torchlight, waiting to become either salvation or damnation. The village square had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom, with wooden benches arranged in careful rows before a raised platform where Lord Blackthorn sat beside Sir Geoffrey. The ceremonial goblet, an ornate silver chalice that gleamed in the torchlight, rested on the table between them. It filled with wine that would traditionally be shared to seal any judgment rendered. Duke Emeric entered the square, with Elara at his side, Lady Catherine flanking them both. The child wore her blue gown with quiet dignity, her small hand resting confidently in Emeric's as they approached the assembly. Behind them came Brother Benedict, carrying the sealed testimony and analysis that would either save or condemn them all. "Behold," Sir Geoffrey announced in a voice that carried across the square, "the child whose fate we gather to determine. Let all present witness this proceeding conducted under the authority of Crown and Church." Lord Blackthorn rose from his seat, his black robes making him appear like a carrion bird perched above the crowd. "Good people of this region, we are here because a dangerous creature has been allowed to poison the very air we breathe. Duke Emeric, in his misguided mercy, harbors the demon child who murdered her own parents." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Villagers who had known the Ravencrest family, merchants who traded in the region, farmers whose livelihoods depended on the land's prosperity. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity, fear, and uncertainty. "Furthermore," Blackthorn continued, producing a small vial from his robes, "my men have discovered this among the child's possessions, a poison of the most deadly variety, proof of her malicious intent toward all who show her kindness." Emeric felt Elara's hand tighten in his, but the child's voice was steady when she spoke. "That's not mine. I've never seen it before. The demon lies as easily as breathing," Blackthorn replied smoothly. "But we have evidence beyond denial." Sir Geoffrey reached for the ceremonial goblet, his movements theatrical and deliberate. "By ancient tradition, we shall conclude this matter with the sharing of wine that represents the community's commitment to justice and truth." Brother Benedict stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of the Church. "Before any judgment is rendered, I demand the right to present testimony on behalf of the accused." What testimony could possibly excuse such obvious guilt? Blackthorn asked, but there was a slight edge of nervousness in his voice. "The testimony of a dying man who witnessed the true poisoning, the murder of Lord Garrett and Lady Isabel Ravencrest." Benedict's words hit the assembly like a physical blow. "Impossible," Sir Geoffrey said quickly. "All witnesses to those deaths have been questioned thoroughly." "All but one," Benedict replied, withdrawing Willem's sealed statement. "Willem, who served the Ravencrest household for 30 years, who saw Lord Blackthorn add substances to wine in the cellar 3 nights before his lord and lady fell ill." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Several people stood to get a better view as Benedict read Willem's testimony aloud, his voice carrying clearly across the square. Blackthorn's face had gone pale, but he recovered quickly. "The ravings of a dying man, influenced no doubt by the demon child's supernatural powers. Such testimony means nothing." "Then perhaps this will mean something," Lady Catherine said, stepping forward and producing the witness ring. The signet ring of Lord Garrett Ravencrest, given to Willem as proof that his daughter lived and mattered. Sir Geoffrey examined the ring with growing discomfort. As the Crown's representative, he could not easily dismiss such a significant piece of evidence. "And this," Brother Augustine added, presenting his analysis of the poison, "proves that the substance Lord Blackthorn claims to have found among the child's belongings requires expertise and equipment far beyond the reach of any 7-year-old. The tide of opinion in the square was beginning to shift. Faces that had shown fear and suspicion were now turning toward confusion and doubt. The evidence was mounting too quickly, too thoroughly, for Blackthorn to dismiss. "Enough!" Blackthorn shouted, his composure finally cracking. "These are all fabrications, lies created to protect a creature of darkness. I call upon Sir Geoffrey to render judgment immediately before this corruption spreads further." Sir Geoffrey reached again for the ceremonial goblet, but his hand shook slightly. "The wine of judgment must be shared," he announced. The child will drink first, as is traditional when accusations of poison are involved. It was the moment Emeric had been waiting for. "Indeed," he said calmly, "let us follow tradition exactly. But first, let Lord Blackthorn demonstrate his faith in the wine's purity by serving it himself." Blackthorn's eyes flicked to the goblet, then to Emeric's face. For just an instant, something close to panic showed in his expression. "That is not necessary. Sir Geoffrey can—" "But surely," Emeric continued, his voice carrying the authority of command, "a man so concerned with proper procedure would want to ensure the wine is safe for a child to drink. Unless, of course, he has reason to doubt its purity." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Around the square, people leaned forward, sensing that something crucial was about to unfold. The ceremonial goblet sat between them, gleaming in the torchlight, waiting to become either salvation or damnation. The moment stretched like a bowstring drawn to its breaking point. Lord Blackthorn's hand hovered over the ceremonial goblet, while every eye in the square watched his hesitation. The torchlight caught something metallic around his neck, a delicate chain that had been hidden beneath his dark robes. Elara gasped, her small voice cutting through the tense silence. "That's Mama's locket." The words struck the assembly like lightning. Lady Catherine stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the jewelry that had become visible as Blackthorn leaned forward. The locket was unmistakably feminine, crafted of gold with intricate engravings that caught the firelight. "What did you say, child?" Sir Geoffrey asked, his voice uncertain. "That's my mama's locket," Elara repeated, her voice growing stronger. "She wore it every day. It has a picture of me and Papa inside, and on the back it says, 'Forever in my heart,' in her mother's handwriting." Blackthorn's hand flew to his throat, attempting to conceal the jewelry, but it was too late. The crowd had seen it, heard Elara's recognition, and understood the implications. "Show us the locket," Brother Benedict demanded. "If you have nothing to hide, surely you can explain how you came to possess Lady Isabel's most precious jewelry." This is my own family's piece," Blackthorn stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "A coincidence of design, nothing more." "Then you won't mind opening it," Emeric said, his tone deadly quiet. "If it belongs to your family, it will contain portraits of your relations, not the Ravencrest family." Sir Geoffrey, caught between his corrupt loyalties and the weight of evidence, found his authority slipping away. "Lord Blackthorn, I must insist you—" "No!" Blackthorn exploded, his composure finally shattering completely. "I will not be subjected to this farce, this mockery of justice orchestrated by a man who harbors demons and the fools who enable him." In his rage, he grabbed the ceremonial goblet and thrust it toward Elara. "Drink, demon child. Drink and prove your innocence if you can." But Thomas had been waiting for exactly this moment. The captain's massive frame moved with surprising speed as he intercepted Blackthorn's arm, preventing the goblet from reaching Elara's lips. "My Lord Blackthorn," Thomas said with grim satisfaction, "you seem very eager to have the child drink wine that you yourself refused to taste." The confrontation became physical as Blackthorn tried to wrench free from Thomas's grip. In the struggle, the locket chain broke, sending the precious jewelry clattering across the platform. Lady Catherine immediately retrieved it, her fingers finding the tiny clasp that opened the pendant. "Behold," she announced, holding the locket high so all could see. The portraits of Lord Garrett and Lady Isabel Ravencrest, just as their daughter claimed. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. The evidence was overwhelming now. The poison analysis, the witness testimony, and finally the murdered woman's locket, worn as a trophy by her killer. "Murderer!" someone shouted from the crowd. "He killed them for their lands," cried another voice. Blackthorn, seeing his carefully constructed lies crumbling around him, made one final, desperate gambit. Drawing a concealed dagger from his robes, he lunged toward Elara with wild fury. "If I cannot have the lands, then the last Ravencrest dies tonight." But Duke Emeric had anticipated this possibility. His sword cleared its scabbard with practiced speed, intercepting Blackthorn's attack with a ringing clash of steel on steel. The two men faced each other across the platform, the Duke's blade steady and controlled, Blackthorn's dagger trembling with desperate rage. "Stand down," Emeric commanded. "You are finished, Blackthorn. Surrender now and face justice with what dignity you have left." "Never," Blackthorn snarled. "I will not be destroyed by a child and her protector." He attacked again, but 30 years of military training told in every movement Emeric made. The Duke's blade turned aside the wild thrust and riposted with surgical precision, sending Blackthorn's dagger spinning away into the crowd. Sir Geoffrey, finally finding his voice and authority, stood from his chair. "Lord Blackthorn, I place you under arrest for the murders of Lord Garrett and Lady Isabel Ravencrest, for fraud against the crown and for attempted murder of their heir." The corrupted official had clearly decided that his association with Blackthorn was more liability than asset. Self-preservation had overcome whatever financial incentives had once bought his loyalty. Blackthorn fell to his knees on the platform, the fight draining out of him as Thomas and several other men moved to secure him. Around the square, the crowd buzzed with shocked conversation as the full scope of his crimes became clear. Elara stepped forward, approaching the man who had murdered her parents and tried to kill her. When she spoke, her voice carried a dignity that silenced the entire assembly. "You took my mama and papa away from me," she said simply. "But you didn't win. They loved me, and now I have people who love me too. Love is stronger than hate, Lord Blackthorn. That's something you never understood." In that moment, facing her parents' killer with courage and compassion rather than hatred, 7-year-old Elara Ravencrest proved herself worthy of the noble blood that flowed in her veins and the love that had chosen to claim her as family. 6 months had passed since that winter night when Duke Emeric found a broken child in the snow, and the spring sunshine that now warmed Caerwyn Castle seemed to carry with it the promise of new beginnings. In the solar where he had first held Elara, a new heraldic banner hung beside the window, a design that combined the Caerwyn wolf with the Ravencrest raven, symbolizing the union of two families into one. The new family crest had been commissioned to celebrate what the royal court had formally recognized. Lady Elara Ravencrest was now also Lady Elara of Caerwyn, daughter by choice if not by blood to Duke Emeric. The restoration of her lands and titles had been swift once Blackthorn's guilt was established, but more importantly, she had found something that all the noble titles in the kingdom could not provide, a home where she was cherished for herself. "Papa!" Elara called from the courtyard below, her voice bright with laughter. "Come see what Brother Benedict taught us today." Emeric rose from his desk, where he had been reviewing reports from the Ravencrest estates, lands that were thriving once again under honest stewardship. Through the window, he could see Elara with a group of 6 other children, all of them gathered around a small garden plot where herbs and flowers grew in neat rows. These were the children they had taken in over the past months, orphans and outcasts who had found their way to Caerwyn Castle, drawn by stories of the Duke who protected the unwanted, and the little girl who had faced down a killer with courage beyond her years. Each child had arrived broken in their own way, and each had slowly begun to heal in the warmth of a household that understood love was not limited by blood. Helena appeared at Emeric's elbow, wiping her hands on her apron as she watched the children work. "She's teaching them about the healing herbs, just as her mother taught her." "The circle continues." "Indeed it does," Emeric murmured, noting how naturally Elara had taken to the role of teacher and protector for the younger children. At 8 years old now, she had grown tall and strong, her dark hair braided with ribbons that Lady Catherine had brought on her weekly visits. Thomas approached from the armory, his expression pleased. "My lord, the last of Blackthorn's men have been cleared from the Ravencrest lands. Sir Geoffrey's replacement, Sir Marcus of Dunwall, has proven far more honest in his dealings, and Blackthorn himself, executed yesterday morning as ordered by the Crown." His confession included details of 17 other suspicious deaths over the past decade. Apparently his appetite for murder and theft was larger than anyone suspected. Emeric nodded grimly. Justice had been served, though it could never restore the lives lost to that man's greed. But perhaps it could prevent future tragedies. Papa! Elara called again, this time appearing in the solar doorway with dirt under her fingernails and a crown of flowers in her hair. You have to come meet our newest student. He followed her down to the courtyard, where a boy of perhaps 5 years stood uncertainly beside Brother Benedict. The child was thin, obviously underfed, and bore the marks of someone who had learned not to trust adult promises. This is Jamie, Elara explained, taking the boy's hand with gentle authority. He was living in the forest near the monastery, all by himself. Brother Benedict says his parents died of fever last winter. Emeric knelt to bring himself to the child's eye level, remembering another winter day when he had found another lost soul in need of rescue. Hello, Jamie. I'm Duke Emeric, but the children here call me Papa if they want to. The boy's eyes were wary but curious. Elara says you collect broken kids and fix them. I wouldn't put it quite that way, Emeric replied with a gentle smile. But yes, this is a place where children can be safe, can learn, can become whoever they're meant to be, even if people say you're cursed. Jamie asked, and Emeric realized this child had faced his own share of superstition and cruelty. Especially then, Elara answered before her father could speak. We don't believe in curses here. We believe in love and family and taking care of each other. As the afternoon progressed, Emeric watched Elara guide Jamie through the castle, showing him the kitchens, where Helena would always have warm bread and kind words, the library, where Brother Benedict taught letters and numbers, the gardens where they grew both food and flowers. She had become what she needed most when she first arrived, a voice that said, "You belong here," to children who had forgotten they belonged anywhere. That evening, as had become their custom, Emeric and Elara sat together in the solar while she told him about her day. The other children were settled in their beds. The castle was quiet, and father and daughter shared the peaceful moments that had become precious to both of them. Jamie asked me something interesting today, Elara said, curled up in her chair with a cup of warm milk. He asked if I ever missed my first parents. What did you tell him? I told him that I'll always love Mama and Papa Ravencrest, and I'll always miss them. But missing them doesn't mean I can't also love you completely. Her dark eyes were serious, thoughtful. I think love just grows bigger when you need it to. It doesn't run out. Emeric felt his throat tighten with emotion. You're very wise for someone who's only 8. I had good teachers, she replied with a smile. All of them, outside the window. The new family crest fluttered in the evening breeze, wolf and raven together, symbolizing strength, loyalty, and the kind of fierce protection that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with choice. In the village below, lights twinkled in windows where families gathered for their evening meals, secure in the knowledge that their lord would protect them as fiercely as he protected his own children. And in the solar of Caerwyn Castle, Duke Emeric of Caerwyn held his daughter close and understood that sometimes the greatest victories were not won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when broken hearts learned to trust again, when lost children found their way home, and when love proved stronger than all the forces that sought to destroy it.